This is a sermon from Hounslow Town Church. We meet every Sunday at 9:45 in the Arts Center, located in the Treaty Center on Hounslow High Street. For more information and resources, please visit hounslowtownchurch.org.
Good morning, everyone. As a way of introduction, I want to ask you, what is your most precious, most prized possession? What is it that you have that you treasure most of all? For some, it might be your phone. For others, it might be a favorite item of clothing, perhaps shoes. For others, it might be a piece of jewelry or piece of art that has been passed down through your family. What would you say is your most treasured possession? And as you think of that, let me ask you, how do you treat that? Do you keep it locked away in a safe, rarely brought out? Are you fearful of others seeing it and fearful that others might steal it? Or do you use it and do you share it and do you enjoy it? As I ask that question, I'm reminded of a story in my life that was really interesting. We were traveling in the north of England, in Yorkshire, and we were with my wife's family. And her stepfather was with us. He since has passed and gone to be with the Lord, but he knew, his last name was Birdsall, and he knew that his ancestors had come from this village in Yorkshire called Birdsall. And so the family decided to go to his ancestral village. And we went there. It was a quaint little village. There was a church, and there was a pub, and there was a row of houses. There wasn't much else, except there was a very large manor house, very large estate. It was much like, you could say, like Austerley House, a big grand house with lovely gardens. And we thought, well, let's go explore this house. And so we went across the yard, the gardens, and we thought, well, maybe we could go inside the house. Now, granted, this is not a public house. It wasn't a museum. It wasn't like Austerley House and Ashley Trust where you can go inside. You could pay a fee and go inside. This is someone's house. And so we knocked on the front door, and we were greeted by someone. It might have been a servant. And we explained the situation that our step-grandfather had come from this village, and we were interested in seeing the house. And this person went away, said he needed to speak with the owner, and the owner arrived. And we met the owner. His name is Lord Middleton, my first time meeting someone who has a title. And again, we explained the situation. And when you really think about it, it is quite a strange request to, could we go inside and see your house? And yet, would you let these strangers inside the house? And yet, Lord Middleton, he did. He let us in. And he brought us in, and we went through the front door into this large room with a grand staircase and a huge chandelier. It was quite lovely, what you expect. And he showed us a few rooms, and on the tour, we saw some really lovely doors, and we said, what's through those doors? And Lord Middleton said, oh, nothing. And he nothing's there. And then he showed us a few other rooms. And through the course of time, we talked with him, we got to know him. And when we came back to where those doors were, he said, would you like to see what's through those doors? And we said, sure, thinking it was nothing. And the doors opened, and inside was the most beautiful dining room that I had ever seen, right? Massive table set with all the lovely silverware and china. It was set for a feast. And what was clear to us is that before, he didn't trust us. But through the course of that conversation, he realized we were exactly who we said we were. We were Americans who were traveling as a family, and that while we were strangers to him, we were not there to do him harm. And in a brief moment, he allowed us into a room that contained some of his most treasured possessions. For a brief moment, he allowed us to see those and to enjoy those. What had happened in that interaction is that this Lord Middleton, he had changed before our very eyes. At the start, he was hesitant. He was fearful of us. But as he got to know us, he realized that we were harmless travelers, and we were not there to do him harm. We were not there to rob him. He trusted us, and as he trusted us, he became free to show us his most treasured possessions and to enjoy those with us. Now, I tell this story to set the stage for our passage that Stephen read for us, right? Today, we're going to meet two people. One of them had been changed by Jesus and was free. The other one didn't trust Jesus at all and was enslaved. One who had been changed by Jesus and was set free to truly enjoy him and to truly enjoy life. And the other one was still enslaved. And in the end, because he was enslaved, he did some really ugly things. And so, as a way of an outline, here are the things I want to cover. I want us to see, firstly, what it means to be enslaved to ugliness. And we see those in verses 1 and 2 and then 10 and 11. And secondly, I want us to see what it means to be freed for beauty, to do something beautiful, to be beautiful. And lastly, verses 8 and 9, we're going to see how we get that freedom. But we have to begin with ugliness because that's where our passage begins. Passage begins and ends with ugliness. In the middle there is beauty, but around it there's a sandwich of ugliness. And so let's start there. Verse 1, we read that the chief priests and scribes were seeking how to arrest him, this is Jesus, by stealth and to kill him. And they said, we have to do it in secret, not during the feast. This is the time of the Passover, lest there be an uproar from all the people. You see, at the time of Passover, the city of Jerusalem swelled with travelers 5 to 10 times the amount of people who normally live in the city. There was a massive crowd of people in the city celebrating the Passover. And so these leaders who wanted to kill Jesus, because Jesus was popular, they had to do it in secret. And then we read in verse 10 that Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12, he went to these leaders who wanted to kill Jesus, and he betrayed them. And when they heard that he was willing to turn over Jesus to them in secret, they were glad, and they promised to give him money. And so we read that he sought an opportunity to betray them. Do you see there's the ugliness, right? There's the ugliness, a secret plot to murder someone who is innocent. There's the ugliness. A betrayal by one of his closest people. There's the ugliness. So let's look at Judas. Yeah? Judas had not been changed by Jesus. He had spent 3 years with Jesus. And he had not been changed by Jesus. Rather, he used Jesus. His relationship, we see this in our passage, his relationship with Jesus was what we would call transactional. Okay? He was with Jesus and would go along with Jesus in order to get things from Jesus. He was motivated by the stuff that he would get from him. And as long as Jesus would continue to provide value to him, he would remain in relationship. Judas would remain involved. What Judas wanted from Jesus really was two things. We see this throughout all the scriptures, throughout the other gospel stories, but they were largely money and fame. He wanted money and fame. John tells us this in John 12, that Judas was a thief. And he was the treasurer for the followers of Jesus. It says that he had charge of the money bag, and yet he used that to help himself to what was put in it. In other words, he stole from Jesus' treasury, right? So he was in love with money. He wanted money from Jesus, but he also wanted fame, right? Being associated with Jesus, who was popular, brought fame to his closest followers. But things now at this point in the relationship had developed such that Judas could see the writing on the wall, right? Jesus was in trouble, and Judas read that. And here's what went through Judas's mind. It was all transactional. He thought, what is Jesus good for me? Is he better alive or dead? And the answer was, a dead Jesus and 30 pieces of silver in my pocket are worth more to me than Jesus alive. You see the transaction that went through his mind? Judas was a person who used people. We know from the Gospel of Matthew 26, that Jesus ended up receiving 30 pieces of silver. So in other words, the price of his relationship with Jesus was worth to Judas 30 silver coins. The value of Jesus' life to Judas was 30 silver coins. And so Judas decided that it was better at that point in his life, in his relationship with Jesus, to take the money and to run, to cut ties, than to continue going through the motions of being one of his disciples. Judas, we see here, was enslaved to a way of treating people in which he viewed them as transactional. He saw people as, I will be in relationship with you to only when I can get things from you. He calculated the cost. What does it mean for me to be in that relationship? What do I have to do to be in that relationship in order to get from them what I want from them? See, this is the way of business, isn't it? This way of treating people is how businesses operate. And businesses, by the way, I don't think there's anything wrong with this. Businesses put a value on an employee, and they pay that value. It's called a salary, right? It's the cost of doing business. The business pays an employee a salary, and in return, there's a transaction. In return, the business expects something from you, right? So every one of us who has a job, we know this to be true. And yet, some of us take that way of treating each other, which is fine in the business world, we take that into life, and we view people as what is the cost to us to be in a relationship with them in order that we can get things from that person. How can we use those people for our own end? And this is what Judas was doing. This is what Judas was doing. And I want us to, this morning, before we go on, just to pause and think, how do we treat people this way? Can you think of someone who you treat this way? Some of us, actually, we treat God this way. I think I've told this story before, but when I was young, 10-year-old child, I played football, and I would make deals with God. As I was sitting in church services, I would make a deal with God. My deal was always, God, I will listen to the sermon, and I will go through all the things of the service, and I'll be a good 10-year-old, but I'll do that in order for you to later bless my football match. When I played football later in the week, God, I want to score goals. I want my team to win. I want you to bless me. So here's the deal. I'll be good. I'll listen. I'll be a good little church person, but you have to bless me, right? That's how I view God. It's very transactional. If I do this, then God, you give me that. Here's the problem, though, with transactional relationships like that. They are enslaving. You are in a relationship with that person to get something from them, which means that you love what you're going to get from that person more than that person. You're actually in love with whatever you want to get from them. For Judas, it was money. For me, it was football. My little deal with God wasn't about a love relationship with God. I was in a love relationship with football. I wanted success. I wanted fame. I wanted success in football more than I wanted God. I was using God to get something else. And that's enslaving. And the result of being enslaved, we see it, right? It's ugliness. The consequences of treating people or treating God that way is ugliness, and we have it right here in our text. It's betrayal, it's cheating, it's lying, it's falsely accusing someone, it's a secret arrest, it's murder. So those of us who are enslaved to these types of relationships, inevitably what comes out is sheer ugliness. Now contrast that, secondly. Contrast Judas, who's enslaved with this woman in verse 3. We don't know her name, but she had been set free. And when she was set free, what she does, Jesus says, she does something that's beautiful. So we don't know her name. We don't know a lot about her. But she was obviously someone who had been around Jesus and someone who had been changed by Jesus and someone who was allowed access to the inner circle where he was, right? He was at a dinner by this guy Simon, hosted by this guy Simon, and this woman was allowed in. And here's what she did. She took an alabaster flask of pure nard, which we read was very costly, and she broke it. She broke the neck of it, and she used that to pour it over the head of Jesus. Now, most of us don't know what alabaster is. I to be honest, I don't. I probably only know of the word from reading this story before. But alabaster is like a marble. In the time of Jesus, Egypt was known for the place of it to be manufactured. So most likely the jar came from Egypt. Nard is interesting. Those of us who come from India or Pakistan, you may know what nard is, but it's a plant that grows in the Himalaya mountains, up about 9,000 to 15,000 feet. There's this plant. It's like a honeysuckle, but the root of it is called nard, and you harvest the roots and you crush it, and it releases an oil that is a beautiful perfume, right? And so already you can see that these two things, they came far from the land of Israel. At that time, anything that would come from in Pakistan, Nepal, India, from the Himalayas, all across Asia, you know that's very expensive because it's expensive to import those things, right? So it's obvious that this was something of value. And we read what it's worth, right? It was worth 300 denarii, which to translate into our money, our currency today, is about a year's worth of wages. Denarii is what you get paid for one day's worth of wages. So 300, think of your salary for a whole year. That's what this thing was worth. And in an instant, she breaks it and pours it on Jesus, right? This jar most likely was a family heirloom. It most likely had been passed down through the generations of her family. In an agrarian culture, people don't just buy things like this, so it was most likely something very precious to her. And she uses that all in Jesus. In other words, she gives up all that she is worth. This is her most prized possession. What she's worth, all of her equity, she uses that to anoint Jesus with this oil, with this nard. And you can imagine, maybe even you're thinking of it, right? The critics come out instantly when she does this. Verse 4, why was this ointment wasted like that? For it could have been, this is very self-righteous, for it could have been sold and given to the poor, right? We can hear people say this today. Why are you wasting that? In other words, for those who see relationships as transactional, they're asking, what benefit could come from anointing Jesus with this special oil? If you see that as being wasted, you're thinking transactionally. You're thinking that money could have been used for a better purpose. And they scolded her, we read. You've wasted so much money. Lady, what do you think you're doing? You foolish person. Why are you throwing around money? Why are you so lavish with this money? Who do you think you are to waste something like that? But Jesus says, verse 6, he says, leave her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has done a beautiful thing. For you always, about the poor, he says, for you always will have the poor with me, and whenever you want, you can do good to them. But you will not always have me with you. Jesus is saying here that the thing that she has done is not worthy of being condemned. It was a thing of beauty because it was done for him. She could do this because she had been freed from all other loves. Her love of honor, her love of money, all other loves. She was free from those. Those did not hold her back. And so in her freedom, she was able to express her love for Jesus in a beautiful way by giving to him the most beautiful and most expensive possession she had. We meet here a woman who's free, not enslaved to greed, not enslaved to being consumed by what other people think, but free. She was free. Free to do something beautiful. Free to show her love. And why was she free this way? Because she knew the worth of Jesus. She knew the beauty of Jesus. She was in love with something greater, with something more beautiful. She knew Christ. When all the others were saying, why are you doing this? Jesus isn't, what they're saying in effect is, Jesus isn't worth that. Why are you wasting your money on Jesus? She knew otherwise. She knew that Jesus was worth it. And so she would have understood these words to a hymn that we sang just 2 weeks ago, written by this guy, Isaac Watts. We sang it called "When I Survey the Wondrous Cross." The last line, the last stanza is this: "Were the whole realm of nature mine, if all the nard of the world were mine," right? That would be a present far too small. So think of all the value of the world. The hymn writer says that would be a present far too small. Love so amazing, so divine, love shown at the cross, demands my soul, my life, my all. See, this woman, she understood this. She understood that there is no gift given to Jesus that could be too extravagant. No gift given to him would be more beautiful and would outshine Jesus than the gift that he has given to us. See, we can't outgive Jesus. And so whatever we do give to him pales in comparison to his gift for us. She understood this. She got this. You see, when you love someone, you're not concerned by the cost of the gift that you give to them. You know, when you love someone, you're not concerned by the cost of the time that you spend with them. You want to spend time with someone you love. You want to enjoy when you spend money on someone you love. You want to do that. This woman wanted to give of this gift to Jesus, to share in this beautiful thing that she had and to share it with him. You know, when you think of someone who proposes in marriage, they want to make it beautiful, don't they? The wedding, you want it to be beautiful. The proposal, you want to do it in a nice spot, in a beautiful spot. You want to make things beautiful. When when a groom buys a ring and gives it to a bride, you want it all to be beautiful. When friends spend time with one another, you do it because you want to be with your friend. The cost to you of your time with your friend, the cost of whatever you're doing with your friend, that cost is meaningless to you. Why? Because you want to be with the person that you care for and love. See, when you love someone, you don't count the cost. When you love someone, that person is the gift. And when it comes to Christ, this woman understood it most of all. So the question then is, how do we get that freedom? Lastly, the third point on the outline, how do we get that? How do we move from being enslaved like Judas to being free to love? Firstly, we have to look at Judas and say not to follow in his way, right? His way is the way of giving into our selfish desires. And it's worth saying again, that always leads to destruction. You know, he actually sat there watching this woman pour this expensive nard on Jesus. He watched it all happen, and his response was to leave, and he went and took his 30 coins of silver. And elsewhere, other gospel writers tell us that as soon as he received those coins of silver, he committed suicide because he realized the ugliness that he had been a part of. He remained enslaved to sin, enslaved to ugliness to the end of his life. So what's the secret to freedom, to free living, to living in love, to living in joy? Well, Jesus tells us. Verse 8, he says that she anointed my body beforehand for burial. You see, she believed the gospel. She recognized what the trajectory of what Jesus was going on. Jesus had been saying, I'm going to die. When we go to Jerusalem, I'm going to die. She believed that. She was probably alone in that room believing that. So she understood what needed to happen here. She looked to Jesus. She understood that his death was going to be a sacrifice for sin. She understood that the Messiah had come to give his life as a sacrifice for sin. And she believed it. John Lynn, who's pastor in New York City, he put it like this. He said that this woman broke her jar and poured out something worthy, right? She broke this jar and she poured out something worthy. But she did that because she believed Jesus, who did this. Jesus broke himself and he poured out himself for people who are unworthy in order to make them beautiful. See, she understood the gospel, and she understood the beauty in what Jesus was about to do. She understood the beauty of the cross, and she realized that Jesus, if that is true, if Jesus died on the cross, then that is the most beautiful picture of love and of giving of yourself that the world has ever seen. She said, that beauty pales into comparison to the beauty of my nard and of me breaking. But my response to that is to give my life away, is to give my most treasured possession away. She understood love so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life, my all. So you see, when you come to see the beauty of Jesus and you give your life to him, he sets you free. Do you see that? Do you see how being in love with the greatest beauty of letting God define and shape your love, it sets you free from all lesser loves. When you give your life to him, he frees you and he changes you. Just like that guy, Lord Middleton, that I met so many years ago. He became free when he learned to trust us. He was changed and he was set free. So how do you get that freedom? Answer, you believe the gospel and you let Jesus change you. And that's something that we as followers of Christ, we need to constantly be doing daily. We need to be believing the gospel and asking Jesus to change us. You see, if you're the sort of person, if you're like me, who you recognize that there are times when you use other people, if you're like Judas in this way, ask Jesus to change you. Look at his beauty. Jesus, think of Jesus. Jesus never uses anybody. He never used you. He loved you. He gave his life for you. Not to get something from you, but to give of himself for you. He lived to be in relationship with you. So ask him to change you so that you can love people as people, not as objects to use, but people for who they are. People who can do nothing for you, right? Ask Jesus to change you so that you can love people who can literally do nothing for you. Ask him to change you so that you can love your enemies. And ask him to change you so that you love the people even who you know can do things for you, but to change your motivation so that you're not in a relationship with them to get stuff from them, but rather so that you can love them for the sake of relationship with them. Ask him to change you. And you know what? He will. He does. Trust him, give your life to him, and then ask him to change you. And when he does, when he will do that, and when he does that, when you give yourself away, what you'll find is that you are then a participant in the beautiful things that Jesus does. Just as this woman did something beautiful for Jesus, he too did a great, beautiful thing of giving his life on the cross. And he, through his Spirit, will empower you to follow him to do likewise. So let's be people of beauty. Let's give our lives to him, and let's give our lives away. Let's pray.